Thanks again for tuning in to Everything Catholic, and I hope you are going to learn a lot from this one as well. Now here's the table of content for your reference, so without wasting any more time, let's start with the first one on the list, which is on discouragement.
Think of that, discouragement. How many of us experience discouragement, right? But it's not so much experiencing the discouragement that is displeasing to God as in indulging in that vice. Now, it's not yet a vice if you're not addicted, so to speak, to it, or if it's not chronic, but it is something that God can give to us. God can give us desolation. That's discouragement. Look at Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, in the agony of the garden, where he experienced anguish, discouragement, right? He felt a weight upon him of depression, that is, seeing all these souls lost despite his passion, which made him cry out, "Father, remove this chalice from me, but not my will, but your will be done." So in this discouragement, our Lord embraced the moment. He didn't let it oppress him. That's the difference. He welcomed it. He suffered, yes, while welcoming it, but he offered it up with himself. Discouragement is an infectious humor that infects the most beautiful flowers and the most pleasant fruits, and penetrates to the very bottom of the root, whereby that infectious humor invades and withers the whole root and leaves it rotten. Since this bad humor has infiltrated deep within the root, it does not heal. If one does not heal the tree by watering it, and what is contrary to this infectious humor, the root withers, and the tree tumbles to the ground. Such is the soul who becomes contaminated with the infectious humor of discouragement. All right. So we must be purged not only from self-esteem, pride, but also from its antithesis, discouragement, depression. Just the opposite, right? So Satan will try to lead us from one extreme to the other, to being puffed up or deflated. And we must avoid these extremes, remain in the happy mean, in the middle. But you may say, discouragement is inevitable. We all experience it. Of course we do. We all experience it. But it's what we do with it that matters. If we indulge in it, if we sulk over it, feel sorry for ourselves, we are fanning the flame of discouragement, so to speak. Rather, we must, as Jesus tells us, have courage and be not afraid. That is, turn to him, knowing that this comes from him, whether it's directly or indirectly through Satan, so that we can offer it up for the salvation of souls like he did in the Garden of Gethsemane and in other moments of his public life where he was persecuted and dejected, thrown out of the synagogue, excommunicated when Caiaphas tore his garments, and so forth. Another thing, a trapping, that keeps us from taking our flight to the center of God's divine will is neither discouragement nor self-esteem, we've covered those, but disturbances. What are disturbances? Disturbance is nothing other than a lack of abandonment to God. Disturbance is nothing other than a lack of abandonment to God. See how important resigning, abandoning, surrendering one to God's will is? This is the linchpin, so to speak, that keeps the great wheel of God's will turning within the soul, keeping that one eternal act constantly in motion. As the soul progresses in its detachment and grows in union with the divine will, God administers to it the aforesaid chain of great graces that are necessary to live in it. And if the soul is said to dispose itself in order to be found worthy of God's great graces, its very effort of disposing itself is God's work. For the eternal operation of the divine will is already at work in us to convert us, in order that we may be converted, as St. Augustine says. God does everything in us. Everything's a grace, St. Paul says. He provides us with the preliminary grace, and then when we have received that preliminary grace, disposing grace, he then gives us actual grace to do the act.
And for the next clip, I want to share this one on intention, which I think is very important for us to be aware of. Listen to this.
Do your best, and God will do the rest. If you don't intend to do bad, you don't have to worry about wasting time. God will fill in the blanks, so to speak, because these are indeliberate weaknesses of the human condition. Only when we form the intention to do bad, whether it's through jealousy, envy, pride, arrogance, hate, whatever, then we need to reassess, reprioritize, confess, and get back into God's favor. We know that nothing evil can enter God's will. When I say evil, I mean intentionally evil. You see the difference? So if I do something that's wrong, but I don't know it's wrong, or I have no ill will, God will not hold that against me. God looks first at the intention, then at the action or the result. Certainly, we have an obligation to form our conscience so that we know what objectively is bad to Him, we make an effort to conform to. So let's take a person who doesn't care about forming their conscience. They live life very free-spiritedly. Now that's okay, provided they inform themselves of what is pleasing and displeasing to God, namely, His commandments, and what the Church teaches to us today regarding God's divine law. And this extends to bioethics, that is, ways of having a child according to God's law. It regards abortion, artificial birth control. It can regard euthanasia, mercy killing. It can regard other things that are not mapped out, strictly speaking, in the Decalogue and the Ten Commandments, but that are known as apodictic laws. That is, they hinge upon the Ten Commandments because they're grounded in them. And let's suppose that free-spirited person doesn't make any effort to inform him or herself of what is pleasing or displeasing to God, and they say to themselves, I can live a good life because I'm not intending to hurt anyone. Well, God will hold that person to an extent responsible for not having formed their conscience when they could have. On the other hand, a person who does form their conscience as they should and still makes a mistake to their unawares, God is pleased with, because they made an effort, you see, to form their conscience properly by informing themselves of the catechism, of the scriptures, but still, because of the human condition, which is imperfect till the day they die, they make a mistake. In that condition, in that situation, God does not interrupt the continuous flow of His divine operation in the soul, but on the contrary, He redoubles the grace of the person. He surrounds it with new love, new stratagems of love, to make it more attentive in the future, you see.
For the following clip, I really like this one, to remind us of God's presence in all things and to worship God through His creation. Listen to this one and it will make more sense.
I'm not talking about pantheism where they worship creation, but the form of respect for nature and creation, because they see within itself the extension of God's divine being. We are reminded of the simplicity to which the divine will invites us. God all around the world is speaking to us, even in this age of darkness. There is God everywhere. He is in the light that touches our eyes. He is in the air that we inhale and exhale. He is in the space between one step and the other. He is in the ocean's waves. He is in our neighbor. He is in our suffering. He is in the person who is in prison, in the hospital. He's everywhere in that sense, you see. And God, therefore, is waiting for us to acknowledge Him in all things. So prayer is not simply a repetition of petitions presented to God. Prayer is also an appreciation. We passively observe and imitate what we observe that is all around us. We see the sun and we learn from it. We see the beautiful blue skies and we learn from it. We see the creatures like the birds and the other animals and we learn from them. This is the simplicity and the humility that God asks of us if we are to live in His will. We ought to all respect this planet, not just this planet, but all creation. Remember, in the Garden of Eden, God said to our first parents, multiply and be the earth's steward. That's the word used in Hebrew. The poor English translation is dominated. That's not what it says in the Hebrew. Dominate sort of means like you can consider yourself superior to it in such a way that you lose the respect that is necessary or that God put within creation itself. Whereas steward means you are superior to it. Yes, of course, creatures serve us, we don't serve them, but we respect all things in God inasmuch as God made them as instructors to us, okay, and to serve us in our need. Once man grasps this fundamental truth, God opens his eyes to a reality that stood before him in the days of Adam, where he beholds the Creator's handiwork in every creature, where he cultivates and shepherds the earth as God intended, and where he gives back to the earth for what he receives. It is in gaining respect for the earth that man gains respect for all life around him. For God fashioned nature, creation, the cosmos in such a way that it takes very good care of man. It provides for man both physically and spiritually, and it's by its example trains him to care for all creatures. The soul loves God in all creation, with the same love with which God created all things.
And this is also another good one, and you'll definitely find this one useful, especially for those who are going through desolations, consolations, privations, and the likes. Listen to this one.
My daughter, everything that happens externally and internally to the soul, desolations, consolations, privations, contrasts, dying to self and all else, are but my continuous work of molding the soul to accomplish and to carry out in it my will. Once I have achieved this, everything is accomplished and everything brings peace to the soul. Once this is done, once the soul reaches the point where it accepts everything, in order to allow me to accomplish my work of molding it into my will, I then prepare the soul for heaven. So in this passage, God's purifying the soul. See, through consolations, desolations, privations, contrasts, dying to itself and all else. Now what are these consolations, desolations, privations, and so forth? If not, the inconveniences that beset us, that overwhelm us sometimes in life, that we don't expect, or that we are prepared for that come nonetheless. They could be a death in the family, an illness, an accident, a loss of finances, a loss of a loved one, a relationship, a friendship, feeling solitude, desolation, depression. In all these things, God is the one who is at work in us. When we experience, for example, a slight sharp pain out of nowhere, it could be arthritis, right? It could be, a pinched nerve. Or if we even experience a moment of depression out of nowhere. These are invitations of Jesus to us to resign ourselves to that moment and to offer that pain up to Him, knowing that He is giving it to us for a reason, even though we do not know the reason. It nonetheless comes from above. Now, some of you may say, wait a minute, cannot Satan do these things too? Yes, of course he can. But the fact that God permits it, whether it comes from God or from Satan, tells us that it comes, whether directly or indirectly, from God with a reason. So, regardless of where it comes, we can still offer it up. Take as an example Christ, crucified unjustly by Roman centurions at the request of the Jews. Was this from God? Of course not. God cannot will evil. He cannot will these people to kill His Son. That is absurd. Nor can He will original sin. But God permitted these things through the agency of the devil, knowing that Christ would offer His sufferings up for the salvation of many, and that we would offer up all the difficulties, pains, desolations, privations, and so forth, which come ultimately through original sin, for the salvation and sanctification of others. So God's purification serves to dispose the soul by reforming its intentions and actions in this way, so that it becomes one with Him and comes to detest and avoid all formal sins. Now, what are formal sins? Formal sins is a theological term in moral theology that is distinguished from material sins. Formal sins mean I form the intention to commit the sin. I do it intentionally, hence formal sin. I form the intention to commit sin. Material sin means I've committed a sin without any ill will or bad intention. So material means I did not form the intention to sin. Formal, I form the intention to sin. Inasmuch as material sins or indeliberate shortcomings constitute part of man's wounded human nature, they do not present an obstacle to God's operation in the soul, but formal sins do.
You know, there are many things on TV, the internet these days, that show promiscuous, tempting images, and it's almost impossible to avoid coming across any of these, even if we don't want to see them. So in light of that, please listen to this.
Even though one is not obliged, strictly speaking, to confess venial sins in the sacrament of confession, they are nonetheless encouraged to do so, and this comes from the encyclicals of Pope John Paul II and so forth. Different popes issued encyclicals encouraging people, when they confess sacramentally, even though they're not obliged to confess venial sins. And what they mean by that is they don't lose the grace of the sacrament by not confessing venial sin. They are nonetheless encouraged. Why? And this is iterated in Pope John Paul II's encyclical. It eradicates the very roots and tendencies, proclivities, inclinations to sin that a person carries every day. Let's suppose, for example, I finished watching a movie or a television program or read a magazine, and in this program, film, magazine, I saw some promiscuous images or tempting images or provocative images, which pretty much exist everywhere you walk today, and the public mainstream, that is. In me remains an impression from seeing that. Not that I'm necessarily consenting to that, no, but that I'm nonetheless vulnerable to it. What we take in impacts us more or less. It doesn't mean we have to be scrupulous about every little thing we see, because we cannot avoid everything we want when we walk out into the world. We are forced to see some things we don't like. So we don't have to be scrupulous of eliminating everything in our life, right? But rather, when we are exposed to something that puts our soul, jeopardy, temptation, at risk, that impression remains. I'm not saying it will lead you to sin, no, but there is an inclination within us that not even baptism removes. The Council of Trent stated as a matter of doctrine that baptism does not take away the inclination to sin, which is known as concupiscence. That remains in the baptized till they die. So when I see something, even though it's not strong, it may be lightly provocative, it could be moderately provocative, or even strongly provocative, right? Some sort of impression remains in the soul. Now, it doesn't mean I'm going to indulge in that. I can forget it and go my way. However, there is someone who will not want us to forget that and will try to make capital on that impression. And who is that someone? If not Satan. So that thought, impression, view may come back to me in the day, or it may manifest itself in a dream, or it may not. The point is this: when I go to confession and I confess, even though, let's say, I didn't give much attention to it, let's suppose I gave some attention to it, I deliberated on that image, I deliberated on it, right? And drew maybe a few moments of pleasure from it. Let's say I confess that sin to the priest, it's venial. The very roots that are in me from the impression that that image made are eradicated, okay? Now, if I don't confess that, I still receive the fruit of the sacrament of confession, because I still have God's sanctifying grace. As long as I have God's sanctifying grace, I am living in God's grace and I can receive communion. When I go to confession, I confess whatever sins I committed, and the priest gives me absolution, and then I emerge from the sacrament with more grace than when I approached it. This is another teaching from the Council of Trent. The recipient of the sacrament of confession emerges thereof with more grace than they approached it, even if they're in the state of grace when they approach it. Hence the importance of going frequently, not just to be absolved of sin, but to receive greater grace and greater strength. Some people who are advanced in years and are mature in the spiritual way will say, "Father, I don't have any sins to confess. I don't know of anything bad I've done. Why do I have to go to confession unless I'm aware of something really bad?" And I say to that person, sins are not things you did only. Sins are things, more often than not, you failed to do. Ah, they say, I didn't think of it that way. So there are things known as the sins of omission, where I could have done something good and I failed to, be it a prayer, a holy desire, an act of mortification, whatever it may be. They may not all be sins, no, but they may be shortcomings. They may be weaknesses. And these are sufficient to confess. Anything that I'm aware of that may have offended our Lord is material to confess.
Well, that is all for the video this time. Again, thank you so much for taking a little bit of your time to be here with us. Always remember that if ever you have any feedback or suggestion, please don't ever hesitate to let us know in the comments below.